Lord Goldsmith came to the cabinet, he told us, ready to discuss issues, if they came up, and Claire Short told us that she asked for a discussion, but was, I think she said, in quotation marks, shouted down. It didn't happen. You have said in your helpful second memorandum that really the cabinet needed to know where it stood in legal terms in order to address the key moral as well as political issues. Could it actually do that without being fully alive to the fact that the legal arguments were finely balanced, despite the fact the attorney had come down on one side of that balance?
Well, the cabinet were fully aware that the arguments were finely balanced. It was impossible to open a newspaper without being fully aware of the balance of the arguments.
Though that, of course, is not legal advice.
With great respect, we had lawyers from both sides arguing the case in the public print. So it was very clear, with respect, that it was. I mean, there were two arguments going on. One was about the justification, the moral and political justification, and that, in many ways, in the public print, elided with arguments about whether it was lawful or not, but I mean, no one in the cabinet was unaware of the fact that there had been and was a continuing and intense legal debate about the interpretation of 1441 and all the rest of it, as well as a moral and political debate. But the issue for the cabinet was it lawful or otherwise? I just want to say this about legal advice at that stage. What was required? Indeed, you raised it a moment ago. At that stage, was essentially a yes/no decision from the Attorney General, yes/no for the cabinet, yes/no for the military forces. It was open to members of the cabinet to question the Attorney General, although, I mean, obviously I was completely inserted anyway into the argument, so it didn't arise in my case, but the cabinet was composed of some very strong-minded people. John Prescott, Gordon Brown, David Blunkett, Charles Clark, Margaret Beckett. None of these were Wilting Violets, as has sometimes been suggested, but their judgment was, I think, and Margaret Beckett and John Reed brought this out, that it wasn't necessary to go into the process by which Peter Goldsmith had come to his view. What they wanted to know was what the answer was. Can I just say this about Claire? Claire herself had said, just a week before, when she gave an interview to the BBC, to Andrew Rawnsley, and I quote this, I quote the sentence in full according to the BBC website, the proposition in the resolution is that Saddam Hussein has to be completing absolutely finally on disarmament, or, without another UN process, military action can be triggered. It is not absolutely clear from the context, but I have. Since the second resolution has fallen away by that stage, I think the only way of reading that is that she was acknowledging that that was the proposition in 1441. The other thing was what she said to you, because I checked on this, because I was surprised, was that she said, she didn't say she was shouted down, she said, I was kind of jeered at, and I have to say, and obviously that is. I don't challenge her recollection, but that's not my recollection. Obviously if that's what she felt, but the cabinet. This was a very serious cabinet meeting. People weren't, as I recall, anyway, going off with that kind of behavior. We all understood the gravity of the decision.
Mr. Straw, you were right to say that this was a very controversial decision, and there was, of course, debate raging in the media about the legality or otherwise of law and the two distinct views. Isn't it for that reason that it would have been better if the cabinet had had the full opinion, the balanced finally opinion that Lord Goldsmith wanted to present, but you, according to the documents we have seen, persuaded him not to do so, to present just the answer that you gave to the Foreign Affairs Committee? Because, was it not incumbent on the cabinet to be aware of the arguments and why Lord Goldsmith had come to that conclusion?
I did that, and this says on the notes for the reasons I have explained partly. But, also, because we were concerned about leaks, and through that there is an issue of the position of the military as well. As I say, what the military wanted to know wasn't the process by which a decision had been arrived at.
I'm not talking about the process, I'm talking about the finely balanced judgments that he came to, because given the context in which this debate was taking place, would it not have been better for them to have the full opinion?
As I say, Any member of the cabinet could easily have asked about the finely balanced nature. With respect, I don't think there is any difference between what you are saying and what I'm saying, because the finely balanced arguments are part of the process by which he came to that decision. That's what he was setting out in that lengthy letter of the 7th of March. He was going through all the arguments, just as Michael Wood had gone through all the arguments on the 9th of December of 2002, saying, on the one hand, and on the other, but there is nothing unusual at all about the legal decisions being finely balanced. If you read any law report from the senior courts, they go, on the one hand, and on the other, page after page, and then they come to a decision and say what Cabinet wanted to know and needed to know, which was what was the decision. Nobody was preventing anybody from asking the attorney, including Claire Short, what the position was. In the event, they chose not to. A number of lawyers were around the table. The legal issues had been extremely well aired in public, the press, and people were briefed anyway.
But you persuaded the Attorney General just to give a brief one, because you were concerned about leaks, and if leaks were the main concerns.
It was one of my main concerns, and that was the point that was brought out in my record of my conversation with the attorney.